Hello, everyone. I hope we are all doing very well. I hope that you're having a wonderful day so far, as always, whenever you get around to watching this episode. Welcome to episode number 32 of the Natural Female Muscle podcast. Feels like it's been ages since I've done an episode, which I massively apologize for. It's been a pretty busy past month, I think it must be, since I did my last episode. Just with the traveling that we had to the US for the Natural Olympia and WNBF Worlds, which was absolutely amazing. Not to mention the fact that when we were actually in Seattle for WNBF Worlds, I basically got knocked on my arse with this awful flu that's been going around. So it's taken me a little bit of time to kind of get back into the groove of things. But of course, I still wanted to get back into the episodes and get some bits out before the end of the year, which is why in today's episode we are going to talk about the festive period, because of course it is now December, which is a time for several different festivities. Whether you celebrate Christmas or you like to celebrate things in different ways, regardless of whether Christmas is something you celebrate or not, there's usually different things going on around work or with friends or different things to do towards the end of the year anyway. So there's a lot of different occasions that can pull you away from, your bodybuilding routine that I wanted to go into today. But I did actually want to say, first and foremost, thank you so much to everyone who has been listening across this year. I'm sure I'll do another video before the end of the year. But I have obviously had so much amazing feedback from people, Spotify Wraps, because it's now the time of the year when everyone's been getting and sharing their Spotify Wraps. And I have loved seeing the amount of people with this podcast in their top number one, top five, top 10. I think that I had over 100 people with this as their number one podcast, which is like absolutely insane. And I think it was over 500 of you had it in your top 10. So thank you so much. Like, that's absolutely incredible. It means the world to me. And as always, I'll mention it now so I don't say it at the end. But if you can, like, subscribe, follow, give us a rating on Spotify. That would be incredible, because again, it just helps put the podcast out there for more people who hopefully would benefit from it. And also just helps me to know that you're enjoying the episodes as well. So yeah, huge thank you. I didn't want to get into the episode without saying that, because it really means so much. Like, when I started doing this in February, it was just one of those things that I always wanted to do, because it was, something that I wish that I had for myself. So that's kind of always what I'm trying to do with any content I put out, or what I do with coaching is, trying to have things that I maybe wish that I'd had, or, I wish could have an impact on me. So, yeah, it's really, really amazing. And thank you. But I'll get into the episode, because otherwise I'll keep blabbering on for more than is necessary. But yes, we are going to talk about the festive time of year. Obviously, when I speak about it more so from my perspective, I'll be speaking on my own opinion, kind of talking through how I manage Christmas specifically, because this is now a time of year that I absolutely love. I love Christmas. I'm a bit of a Christmas fanatic. Anyone who actually is watching the video, you will see that, to be fair, the kitchen's not decorated that much, but I have got like a what are they called? Gonk tea towel in the background. So that's pretty much all the festive that you can see in this video. But I love Christmas. I love Christmas now. It's a time of the year that I always look forward to. I get a bit giddy about. I feel like I can be a little bit of a kid, which is a nice thing. But it used to be a time that I really didn't like. I really struggled with it. I used to struggle with feeling very anxious around the time of the year. I think also, like, for me growing up, Christmas was never like the most fun of times either, because I always had a lot of traveling involved in Christmas and loads of like upset with family and things like that, which is a side note, but probably played a role, to be honest, in how I struggled with handling it growing up as well, because I maybe felt like pressurized with the stress at Christmas and not being able to manage that and not being able to enjoy that time frame. But even as I got into bodybuilding, that didn't necessarily help initially, because I felt like I just couldn't enjoy like the festive time period at all. And like I say, it used to just make me feel anxious and like I couldn't make the most of, time spent with family and friends and loved ones, which is obviously kind of what the Christmas period is all about, as well as just having fun and doing different things. So I want to predominantly go through in this episode what I used to do, how I used to do a lot of things wrong and things that I didn't necessarily need to do, and then obviously bring you back around to how I manage Christmas now in a way that makes me happy, allows me to enjoy this time whilst also still working towards the goals that matter to me. Because I think that's the biggest thing, right? It's like you want to enjoy the time period, but you don't want to feel as though it's massively pulling away from your goals, or you're not considering your goals. And that often leads people in this kind of like limbo, this difficult situation where they feel like the two can't coincide, and they absolutely can do. But obviously part of it comes with experience, knowing yourself, knowing what works well physically, mentally, but also, just being able to understand like realistically what you can and can't and also don't need to do in order for that to be the outcome. So because there's no like major like right and wrong, and I don't want to dictate, you should do this or you can't do this, I'm going to speak more through my own experience, particularly because whatever you do or what you maybe need to do in your situation is going to be very relative to you. It's going to be relative to the plans that you have, the goals that you have, how close your goals are, how far away your goals are, how seriously you want to take your goals, and how you deal with off-plan meals or different occasions, psychologically, how your body responds physically, etc. And these are all things that maybe when I'm speaking to a client, we'll go through those on a one-by-one basis if they feel as though they need that guidance, they need a little bit of additional help. But that's why I want to mainly talk about my own experience, give you some of the feedback that I've been able to learn, and hopefully you can kind of take that forwards in your own process. Because if you're in a situation now where maybe you are currently feeling anxious or unsure of what to do, I want you to hopefully be able to listen to this, come out the back end, and feel, instead of being as anxious as maybe you were, feel a bit more excited about the period ahead. And if anyone does have any questions following on from this that relates to their own experience or anything that dives a bit deeper, always feel free to pop me a message on Instagram. I'm always happy to lend a hand and help if ever that's anything that you would like moving forward. So firstly, let's start by going through what I used to do wrong at Christmas time, which I think was probably just about everything. The main problem for me at Christmas, and this was very much the same with like loads of other occasions in my life, was that I never had an off switch from bodybuilding. Um, I was very, very much constantly just bodybuilding. Everything had to be my meal plan, the way that I tracked things, the way that I had set up my training for the week had to be the same. I could not deviate. I could not be flexible. I could not move around. I could not change anything. It was very much an on and off switch. And you'll probably have heard a lot of people talk about, having an on and off switch versus having a dimmer switch, which I think is something that's very, very important to kind of like think in your head as a bit of an analogy. Is like, rather than only ever having an on and off switch with bodybuilding, which often leads people to either be all in or all out, or feel like they're only ever entirely working to their goals or not working to their goals at all, is like having that dimmer switch that you can operate. It can either be on full blast, or it can be, still up high, but just not as high as it necessarily needs to be, or it can come down for a short period of time, it can come back up. You can fluctuate it based on where it's necessarily meant to be. It's never off. This is the way that I like to think about it. It's never off. The dimmer switch is always on, because you're ultimately still always considering your goals, working towards your goals. Over a long-term basis, that light is always on, but it fluctuates as to whether it's like really, really bright and it's at full pelt, or whether it kind of comes down a little bit. That's a really good way to think about it. So my switch was just on all the time. No off switch, no dimmer switch, no nothing. And this was not because really, this was not really out of preference. This was not because I was like, oh, I actually like, to turn it all the way up. Like, I'm really enjoying it. Like, don't get me wrong. I love bodybuilding. I love what I do. But the main reason why I never was able to turn that dimmer switch down at all was because I had a massive misunderstanding. I had a massive lack of education and guilt associated with coming away from and doing things that were, controlled and tracked by myself. I felt like if I was to come away from my like plan as such, like I would be a bad bodybuilder. I would be coming away from my goals. I would be not doing enough. I wasn't showing discipline. I wasn't showing I wanted enough, all these things. Eating off plan was difficult for me. Like, honestly, when around Christmas, around any other occasion, I very much always stuck to my macros, stuck to my goals. That was it. And that was really just because I did not have an understanding, an education, an appreciation that like macros are macros and food is food. Whether I've cooked it myself, whether I've tracked it myself, whether somebody else has cooked it, it was always like I felt like I only could eat what was written down, whether it was written on the plan, whether it was weighed by myself, tracked by myself, because anyone who's kind of in a position where you've been, weighing your food for long periods of time or tracking food for long periods of time, you kind of know that ultimately, like, that looks relatively similar to my normal meal. That'll be fine. It's food is food at the end of the day, rather than kind of only being able to eat something that's obsessively kind of cooked by yourself or made by yourself. And that made me very scared of eating things that, I hadn't weighed or I hadn't measured out, because I was like, it has to be exact, when those margins are so fine. Like, in a prep scenario, those things are important because you need to make sure that you're obviously hitting your targets, sticking to your rate of loss, making sure you're managing performance, etc. But, outside of a prep, like, these are not things that need to be obsessive about. And I was never in a prep. Like, I wasn't in a prep. I wasn't even in pre-prep. I wasn't doing any of that. I was just like monitoring my bodybuilding process, like being in, a standard like off season. And that was the way I treated it, because I felt like if I came away, it was going to have this huge effect. And that's where I think first and foremost, you have to look at what are like the different phases that you could be in, because you do have to consider things differently depending on like what phase you're in around this time of year. Like, the first one, you obviously have the prep scenario, which I've just touched on. Your goals have to be met. I think ultimately it maybe depends on how you're able to manage your bodybuilding process at that point in your journey, and where you're at in terms of readiness for the show, etc. But if you consider a standard prep, and if your prep at a random point falls in Christmas, nothing changes. You're going to have to be on prep in that situation. Maybe you can eat a meal around your family and things like that, but you can't come away from the goal, because that could pull away from, your rate of loss for the week. That could then mean that the rest of the prep is compromised, or the look is compromised, because you're then pushing for a faster rate of loss because you maybe went up in body weight or whatever it may be. So that is a situation where, the goal does have to be met, because that's something that is kind of like imminent and needs to be managed. But across other phases, like even other phases of dieting, so say, a mini cut or just even a pre-prep diet, honestly, you can have a meal off and manage that well by working within the set goals that you have for that day, so that you can maintain body weight across those days, most likely. Sorry. You can either look to work towards the set goal, which is maybe still trying to hit your targets and working around that with your coach, or you can just set the goal to maintain and just adjust food maybe over a couple of days or a day or two. That's doable. If there's not anything imminent in that time frame, you can still be flexible. Like, you can still be flexible in mini cuts, you can still be flexible in pre-preps if necessary, to still meet the goal, but have things that maybe you've not prepped for yourself. That's totally fine. And then when you're in a surplus or you're holding, like, the goal is to still meet the goal. The goal is to either keep gaining body weight, keep holding body weight. Like, a few days across the year of eating food that are not just the meals that are prepped for yourself and not going to have a huge issue. Yes, for the most part, being consistent is important. That will be important to make sure that you're getting in good quality foods, making sure that performance is good, recovery is good, body comp holds well, all of your variables stay in a good spot. But a day or two of having different things is not going to play a huge role. You're going to gain weight either way, wherever it comes from. And this is like almost the worst thing that I did was, I've had several years where I've actually been like gaining weight in a big surplus, and like I've been scared of like having different foods. And it's like, I'm gaining body weight anyway. I'm eating a huge amount of food anyway. My appetite is low anyway. Why do I need to be so obsessive with these different things when it actually doesn't make a difference? If anything, I'll probably feel less stressed, enjoy the occasion more, and probably have better digestion because I will enjoy my food. All these different things that I was just basically trying to monitor myself for fear of like not sticking to the plan or not adhering. And it's like, but why? Like, why is that actually necessary in that specific occasion? Because for several years, I literally did the following. So on Christmas Day with my family, I would like weigh out my protein portion. And sometimes I even tracked the entire Christmas meal. Like I would like ask my mom to like separate my food, and I would like weigh it out, and I would track the potatoes, and I would track the Yorkshire pudding, and like all of these things in a gaining phase, which is completely unnecessary and massively pulled away from my enjoyment and my actual development with relationship with food, because I wasn't able to just like switch off and appreciate that, like, yeah, there's a portion of potatoes, there's a portion of meal, there's a portion of meat, cool, nice meal. I was had to track every single thing, and that's not a good position to be in. It's not a necessary position to be in either. It also wasn't demonstrating to my family that bodybuilding was very good for me either, which is actually really important. I think that ultimately not a lot of people have great relationships with food. I mean, my family definitely don't. So I'm not exactly like needing their approval, because they would probably encourage me to do things that also aren't good for a relationship with food in the opposite way. But at the same time, like showing that I have to weigh every single thing on every single day of the year is not exactly giving bodybuilding a good reflection. And that's not reflective of bodybuilding. That's reflective of my poor management and my poor understanding of what bodybuilding requires. So, and that was not anything that gave good luck. I also refused to be involved with other occasions for no reason at all. And one example that I remember very specifically of this is in 2019. So this is literally 4 years ago now. I was in my off season at that point. I was obviously prepping in 2020, so I was taking this like final stage of the off season very seriously, of course. I say that jokingly. And I was honestly eating so much food at this point. I was so full. My appetite was honestly awful as well. And my whole flat were cooking Christmas dinner. Anyone who's kind of like been to uni or lived with others, or you'll know what it's like when you kind of do this nice Christmas dinner with the people around you a few weeks before Christmas or whenever it is. And this would have been a really, really nice occasion for me to be involved. And for some reason, I mean, I know the reason was because I, again, didn't want to come away from my plan. I did not eat the meal with the flat. And I literally have a picture on my phone. It's awful. I have a picture of my whole flat sat with like their Christmas hats on, having Christmas dinner, and I'm sat at the table, but I've literally got a bowl of chicken and rice in front of me. Like, why did I need to do that? There was no reason for me to do that. Like, and when you actually look at that and you're like looking at the macros and looking at the calories of it, it's like it really wouldn't make a difference if I was to eat the food that they prep for me. Yeah, sure, I don't know the exact numbers. Maybe it's not going to be an exact match, but it doesn't matter. Be close enough. If it's a little bit over on calories, it doesn't really make a huge difference. I'm trying to gain body weight anyway. My appetite's low anyway. If I can eat a meal that I actually enjoy, that's probably better. And, you know, those are kind of like key memories that I look back on. I'm like, why did I not just be present? Why did I not just enjoy that? And in the moment, I would have liked to enjoy that. I would have wanted to join in and like have that meal with my flat and enjoy some nice different food and probably help with the cooking and all these things. And I just didn't, because I thought that my bodybuilding goal was more important. And when you actually break it down, it's like you're doing that for the sake of one day of being in a surplus, being perfect. It's ridiculous. It's unnecessary, genuinely. And that's the way I see it now when I look back. It's like, yes, like over prep, making sure that you are consistent nailing the variables is important. Yes, over and off season, over like longer periods of time, making sure that you are consistent and you're in a surplus, important. A day having a different meal, like, come on now, that's really not going to be affecting, you know, your long-term progress in bodybuilding. You're not going to step on stage, get a placing and think, oh, okay, I didn't get this result because of that one meal that I had in the middle of my off season 5 years ago with my friends sat around a dinner table. Like, it's silly. It really, really is. And I, as a result of, you know, that thought process that I had at the time, I said no to a lot of things. I said no to a lot of things with friends, with family, different dinners, different events, lots of stuff that like I'll never get back, you know, which is not smart at all. And that's kind of why I'm sharing this, because I have clients, I have people who have messaged me on Instagram and will say like, I feel like, you know, I can't involve myself because it's going to make me a bad bodybuilder, XYZ. And it's not the case. Like, I've felt like that, and I've learned that that is wrong, and that is not necessary for me to do that in that situation. And another thing that I also refused to do was I refused to rest around Christmas. So the debate for, what you have to do around the Christmas period, it's kind of really more so preference and where you're at in training. But like I often had times where I like needed to deload. Like I vividly remember being very, very, very fatigued, and it came to Christmas time. It's like great time to deload. Someone said take 3-4 days off, and I refused. And I literally still went and trained, and then just didn't mention it to the coach at the time. And that's not smart either. That's not good. And that was because I felt like I also then couldn't enjoy festivities if I also wasn't then training, because I was like, what's the point in having different foods or enjoying more food if I'm also not going to train? Train if you want to train. If you enjoy training, amazing. If you don't want to train, that's also okay. If you don't need to train, if your body needs to rest, please rest. If anything, having some rest, having some more food is actually a good way for you to feel a lot better when you go back into the gym. And that was actually a situation where I remember that year I actually then made myself poorly because I kept training, and I then came into the new year and I was just smashed and I was actually unwell. And then as a result of that, I was forced to take, I think maybe a week or two off the gym, feeling very poorly because I refused to take the rest when it was needed. So, you learn your lessons one way or the other, but I'd rather you not have to go through that and then eventually have to, experience that yourself and learn from your own mistakes. I'd like for you to hopefully be able to learn something from my own mistakes. So that's very much how I used to approach things before. Now, in contrast, I'll take you guys through how I approach things now, and then I'll give you some things that I would take away to recommend. So now, whenever I have events around a festive period, I literally will treat them as a normal off-plan meal. A normal off-plan meal like I would do in the off season as regularly as they occur. And I have a lot of events around Christmas, often with my family or with friends. But particularly from a family standpoint, I have separate parents. So I'm going to one house, I'm going to the other. I'm trying to do something to celebrate with my mum and then my dad or this and that, which are all actually wonderful, wonderful things I'm very grateful to be able to do that previously would maybe cause me stress. And now I'm just extremely grateful to be able to do those things. But I treat them literally like a normal off-plan meal as I would do in a normal off season, because at the end of the day, they're just an off-plan meal, particularly like outside of Christmas Day, or maybe going for a meal here or a meal there. And it's just an off-plan meal. Like that's all it is. It's a meal that is not prepared by you, that you're swapping out for something else that you'd usually have. And depending on where your food is at, you'll either maybe take a little bit more carbs and fats out the rest of the day, or you'll just swap the same meal. But I will always keep my usual structure around them. The structure does not change. My day-to-day doesn't change. I actually change the mindset rather than having like, I'm having this big meal out or this big meal off. It's like, it's just one of my meals across the day that is not a meal that I'm prepping at home. So what I generally would do is I'll keep my same 4 meals outside of that. The one meal will then be replaced. That would be my 5th meal. And if it's going to be maybe a slightly bigger meal, let's say I know I'm going to be going out for a bigger meal and having a dessert or having a starter, I'll maybe pull my carbs and fats out of another meal as well. So I'll just do protein, fruit, protein, veggie there. Super simple. That's literally how the day looks. And I think simplifying that and then being able to like enjoy that occasion without actually worrying about it, because in my opinion, like a huge part of off-pan meals or events or occasions like this around like the festive time is like the psychological benefit that you have of coming away from your meal plan or coming away from tracking or coming away from bodybuilding. Like you get a huge psychological benefit from that, not to mention the benefit that plays with your relationship with food as well. It's extremely important to be able to do that. And that's also why, encouraging this in your off season generally is important, so that when you come to these times of year, like it's not such a big deal for you to have a different meal or to enjoy something different. It's just as it normally would be at any other point. So it's why I will encourage things like that for my clients normally. And if I notice they maybe haven't had enough meal in the time, I'll go through that conversation with them. So that's general events aside from Christmas. On the Christmas day itself, again, I always kind of keep the same structure. The only thing that I will do is I'll probably just keep protein fruit or protein veggies outside of my main Christmas meal. usually because I will personally have like a starter, I'll have a main, I'll have a dessert, and then I might even have another meal later on that's also not a trap meal. I might have like some more like turkey that my mum's left over with another treat or something like that. So that's why I usually just make more caloric availability through my other meals. But what I will always do is keep my structure to my days. I'll never lose complete structure to the way that my days look. And that's really important from a psychological standpoint to actually help you with managing your appetite across that day as well. So you don't essentially just see the day as like a free for all. Um, Also to help with, like, I think I mentioned digestion. I can't remember if I've just said that, but digestion is one thing. And these are all things that I think are very important, rather than just basically leaving the day completely, actually still having a structure across your day helps you with managing what you eat, eating the things that you actually want to eat, rather than just kind of eating for the sake of eating them. So that's generally the way that my days will look there. No tracking, no stressing, still having a structure, having some caloric availability. Maybe I'll end up eating a little bit more than my normal food for the day, but there is, the availability there. And my food at the time is like, now it's high. I've pretty much always been in off season over Christmas. So I don't need to overly worry about 1 or 2 days. You have the main structure there. You act like an adult with a healthy relationship with food, and make smart choice on that front. And I always rest on Christmas as well. That's something that personally I always prefer to do, simply because I don't really want to go into the gym on Christmas. It's a bit of a busy place on Christmas, to be honest, so I'd rather not. And also for me, like, I like to keep Christmas as a low stress day where I get to just spend the time with family and not have to really think about bodybuilding, because it's good to do that. If you want to train, that's cool. If that adds, something to look forward to on your Christmas day, like, don't feel like you can't do it. But for me personally, it's not something that I like to do. So I personally keep that as a rest day. So running through that, you can see the huge difference in hopefully the way that I think about things now than the way I used to, in the sense that everything used to be very controlled, very obsessive, like very worried. Whereas now it's, yes, managing things better physically, but it's also the way that I talk about it is very different, in the sense that I'm so much more relaxed in the way that I think about Christmas, and the fact that I induce so much less stress on myself makes it so much more enjoyable, makes me actually manage those things much better, and I simplify it. And I think that's something that as bodybuilders, we often struggle doing, is like having a simple response. We always want a complicated answer of exactly how to do something or exactly what's the right and wrong thing. And often things are a lot simpler than we actually think or we anticipate them to be. And being able to remind yourself of that is very, very important. So I'll run through a list of things that I have learned and things that I hopefully recommend for you moving forward. So, first things first, Christmas is no different to any other day or any other occasion where you choose to eat something that is not cooked or tracked by you. And that's what I've already kind of been through there, is like, it's just the same as really any other off plan meal or any other occasion where you are having something that is just simply not cooked in your kitchen by yourself, or tracked or measured or weighed. And I mean this in two senses. So the first sense is that, like, that is okay. So do enjoy the meal and do not overstress or stress at all, because it's not necessary. But in the same breath, the second thing to also keep in mind is that don't also then eat with zero thought, just like you wouldn't do with a standard off-plan meal. You have an off-plan meal, but you don't eat for the sake of eating, because still having that structure to your day and having that balance across your day is important. And we know that with off-plan meals, they're not just free for all. I think that viewing Christmas as just a free for all day is a way to potentially set yourself up for damage in a couple of different ways, either overeating or also potentially undereating if you're in an off season as well. And it's probably going to just lead you to actually just not feel good at the end of that day. Like, digestively, you're probably not going to feel good. Energy, you're not going to feel great. It's probably going to affect you for a couple of days as well. So, like, just be smart, have some protein feedings across the day that will help you with appetite management across the day too. Actually feeling normally satiated as you usually would do across the day. All things that are really important, which ultimately, like, as an athlete, like, these are things that are good to keep in mind. And also, even just as a normal person, like having multiple feedings across the day rather than just fasting and having one massive feeding, is something that is helpful for you to gain that better relationship with food, and also to be able to take in the food that you eat a little bit better and make smarter decisions around the time that you are eating. Have awareness of the things that you're eating, the things that you want to eat, finish eating when you are actually full. As I said, it's just another day. And I think that sometimes we feel the need to kind of keep eating for the sake of eating just because things are there, and also often because of pressure as well, like being kind of forced to do something because your family say do this or your friends say do this. And ultimately, if you don't want to, like, that's okay. As an example, like my family are quite big drinkers and they'll probably encourage me to drink at Christmas, and I don't drink. That's a personal choice, and I will quite happily say no. They'll tease me for it. That's fine. I don't want to. And I think that kind of standing your ground and not just doing things for the sake of it because someone says, oh, it's Christmas or it's this day, is not a good enough reason to just do something. I think that if you want to do something, that's perfectly fine. If that makes you happy, if that makes you enjoy it, amazing. But don't feel like you have to do something just for the sake of doing that as well. And just make sure to be present, enjoy having off meals, be present with people. That's a huge part that's going to help you with your awareness as well. And I think that just relating to the whole situation as well, and like having the off-plan meal, etc., is like, don't not do something just because you're scared of doing it. Like, I don't think being in fear of something is a good enough reason for you not to do it. I think that there's some things that are good to be scared of and to not do it, but this is not one of them. Spending time with family at Christmas is not one of them. Spending time having a nice meal and being fearful of that is not a good enough reason to not do it. So have that presence, have that awareness. Now, I do think that if you are dieting, you do have to be mindful of body weight. And the two common scenarios of this are either post-prep or maybe following on from a pre-prep diet. Do set yourself some limits. And do set yourself some structures. That structure, therefore, is going to be like even more important. And definitely probably just having protein fruit, protein veggies around the rest of the meals on the day is going to be really, really key. And based on your levels of food, because you'll have built up to a specific level of food following on from that diet, discuss that with your coach and actually set yourself some boundaries there, which is important because ultimately you have a goal that is coming very, very soon. If you're post prep, you're in a position where you're obviously wanting to manage your body weight carefully. And that's very, very important for the run of your further off season, and also just for your overall health, to make sure that you're not suddenly putting on a lot of body fat very, very suddenly is really important for hormonal regulation. Also just for your body to settle in general. But especially if you're then pre-prep, you have to make sure that you're not putting on 5, 6, 7 pounds over that period, and then maybe that's really affecting you going into that pre-prep, or that prep, sorry, that you've then worked so hard for during the pre-prep. And it happens a lot, and then that really messes up the plan for the year ahead. Because say you're in a spot now where you're planning to start your prep in February or March, and you're in a place where you've got a couple of pounds leeway, but you put that couple of pounds on over the Christmas period, you're now in a position where maybe you're going to have to start prep sooner, or you're in a position where now you're maybe going to affect the start of prep because that start of prep is now pulling off body weight that you hadn't intended to put on. And when you do have a goal like that upcoming, this is where you do have to view yourself as an athlete and have to assess, your goals, and maybe just not necessarily sacrificing, but making smarter decisions around that period is important. So that is something that you do have to be somewhat careful of if you are in that specific position. But in other positions, and mainly speaking on my behalf of like the off-season position, that is how things will be managed on that front, and how you should maybe hopefully view things to be a little bit better and a little bit more enjoyable. Like I said at the start, there's no right and wrong. There's different scenarios for everybody. There's different things that will work for everyone. But hopefully, particularly in the off-season scenario, that's helped you to understand how I've been able to shift my mindset and my approach in order to make that period a lot more enjoyable for myself. So hopefully that was a good listen for you guys. And as I said, if anyone's got more questions, because I know a lot of the time things like this, it's like more personal in your specific experience. If you want to go through any of those things with me, please just let me know. I did have a few questions and I pretty much answered them all in the podcast episode. So hopefully that was helpful. And if anyone has any other topics like at this time of year, or anything else in general that you'd like me to discuss on the podcast, please do just let me know. I'm always happy to hear suggestions, and I want to make sure that with the content that I put out, I actually put out things that are helpful and things that you actually want to hear, rather than me just rambling about random topics that maybe you're bored of hearing. So either which way, thank you so much for listening to the episode today. Like I said, I'm hoping to bring out another episode before the end of the year anyway, so I'm sure I will speak to you guys before Christmas and the New Year anyway. But thank you so much for listening, as always. As I said at the start, if you did enjoy the episode, please make sure to like, subscribe, follow, rate, all of that amazing stuff. And I look forward to speaking to you guys in the next one.